Hello, everyone. Thank you all for tuning into today's webcast. My name is Zina M. Pagan, and I am your host for today. Before we begin with today's program, please take a moment and listen to our house rules. The audio will be streamed. This means you will be able to hear us through your computer speakers. However, if you prefer to use a teleconference option, I will post this information in the chat box. You can also use the Communicate tab in order to access this information. We aim to provide you with the best webcast experience possible, so if you do join us using the teleconference option, please keep your lines muted. Should you have any questions during the session, please use the chat box to submit these. All questions will be addressed at the conclusion of the presentation. This session will be recorded and posted on our website for members only. We will notify attendees of its availability. We are extending the conversation on social media. If you'd like to join us, please use hashtag ARF Webcast. If you're interested in presenting your own work at a webcast, please contact me at zina@thearf.org. Next up, I'd like to invite you all to the final webcast of the year with Newark University of Chicago on December 11th, where we will aim to improve the accuracy of marketing survey data with new statistical approaches. If you're interested in participating, send me a note as well, and I'll be happy to assist. And without further delay, I present to you Catherine Willis, who will introduce the overall theme of this webcast series and our speakers for today.
Hello, everyone. This is Catherine Willis, and I'm a global insight leader. I've been in the insight space on the client side for a number of years across quite a few industries, from airlines to automotive, electronics, and I'm now venturing into telecommunications and home entertainment as my latest adventure. And so I'm excited to talk with you today about our customer experience webinar. And we have with us today Andre Debreu and Fiona Blades, and they're going to take us through a fantastic case study that they recently did. And I'm going to turn it over to Andre to introduce himself, and then Fiona will introduce herself.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Andre. I'm the Director of Intelligence Research and Strategy from Latam Airlines. I've been working for Latam since 2010, and always for customer intelligence, research teams. Our team is much focused on insights and customer experience investments, what we are going to discuss here today.
Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. My name's Fiona Blades, and I'm the founder of MESH Experience, which is a data analytics and insight consultancy. I set MESH up in 2006 following a career in marketing and advertising because I felt there was a bit of a gap in the market, which was to understand every single brand encounter that customers have.
Okay, thank you, Andre and Fiona. This is Catherine Willis again, and again, thank you all for joining us today. Before we dive into our topic for today, I just wanted to briefly discuss why we're doing this whole series on customer experience. And this really came out of conversations that Fiona and I were having and that we were having with a number of other people across many disciplines and many industries. And what we were seeing and talking about is that, customer experience was certainly becoming quite the buzzword. So everyone was talking customer experience. And what we were seeing is that it seemed to encompass everything but the kitchen sink. And that really is that customer experience leaders were being asked to manage all sorts of things, managing everything from a call center down to defining user experience frameworks for a website. So it was really encompassing all kinds of different disciplines. And from the insight side, I was often seeing that insights was thrown in on the side, which sort of gave me pause to wonder how that would work or whether that would work. And so our conversation really came around to, so exactly what is customer experience, or really more importantly, what should it be? And that's when we started diving into a number of topics. And so for today, if we go to the next slide, I'll introduce what we're really talking about today, which is really, as we look at customer experience investments, how do we make sure that the customer is really at the center of those decisions? And looking back across my career, as well as talking with a number of my peers and other people in this space, a few things rose to mind. And really to start with, one of the big things that I've seen, again, across industries and across companies is if you want to put the customer at the center of investment decisions, the first thing that really has to happen that I've found the fastest way is to embed a customer metric into executive compensation. I found that is the fastest and easiest way to get the conversation started at all levels of the company, and obviously most importantly at the most senior levels of the company. And without that, it sometimes is a struggle to really get the customer embedded at the heart of the investment decision. But if you have that metric in there right alongside revenue or other operational metrics, boy, do you get the attention in the conversation. And that metric, it can encompass a number of things. I mean, it could be a customer retention or loyalty metric, a customer satisfaction metric. I've seen several that have worked successfully. I've also used Net Promoter Score or NPS. That's often a very successful one because it does often tie to revenue. In the companies I've worked for, we've been able to directly tie it to revenue, which means that it embeds that customer-centric metric right next to obviously other very important metrics for the senior leaders. And also, you know, it ties in there was the original Bain & Company Harvard Business Review that they clearly showed across industries how Net Promoter Score does move revenue. But again, it doesn't have to be Net Promoter Score. It's whatever your company can really buy into and really support and get excited about. Once that happens, everyone's talking and everyone wants information. So the next big piece of that is obviously alongside understanding all the data and context around whatever study or program you have that brings that metric, you also have to understand, it's very important to make sure you understand all the context and customer attitudes and behaviors. So it's not just about understanding the metric and the data in the one study. You have to understand the whys, the competitive context, and even as you understand the drivers of that metric, really diving down, understanding the attitudes of how people approach each of those different parts. Because without that, often you cannot create the full story that's needed to really bring the needed insights into the investment decision making. And once you have all of that, then really the next step is defining a structure around those different customer experience impacts, the impact on the metric and revenue. And with that structure, you can provide a consistent basis from which to evaluate all the different investment decisions. And that's exactly what Andre and Fiona are going to take us through. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Fiona to start with the case study.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine. Well, first of all, MESH has been lucky enough to work with Latam Airlines since 2014, when we won the pitch to streamline the TAM and LAN brand tracking, which was across all the different countries in Latin America. And after that work, the next big challenge was to help the Latam stakeholders to self-serve their NPS information in a really easy format that could encourage usage of the data, but without needing the resources of a more time-poor insight team. And then about a year ago, Andre approached us with the challenge of how to monetize NPS, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And the start of this approach was to interview stakeholders with the most senior executives in the company. Now, this was vital both to the quality of the overall work that we could deliver, but also to the ultimate buy-in of the project. And I just have to say, what a pleasure it was to have those stakeholder interviews. We were able to get them into diaries. We found stakeholders that were really interested in what we were doing, were prepared to go back and look at the work that they'd done and how it could have been improved and what they would like for the future. So it was really a fantastic opportunity to engage with those stakeholders. Then the MESH was particularly involved with our VP Data Science, Shane, and his team in performing lots of statistical analysis, which you're going to hear a bit about later. And then Latam were leading the process of taking that work and creating the monetizing NPS tool, which Andre is going to show to you. So, what were the problems and opportunities that we faced? Well, honestly, about a year ago, I think I felt a bit like this toddler in the photo. It seemed a really big task. Firstly, how could we put the customer at the heart of investment decisions, such as should we invest in seats with more legroom or improve the food experience? So those were the kind of investment decisions that Latam was looking at. And each time an investment was being considered, the business case was put together in a different way. So there wasn't really any consistency there. And therefore, it would take weeks for each business case to be put together successfully. And that needed to take time from a limited team. Another major challenge was that there was no consensus in academic literature or within the industry actually on a successful model. So it wasn't like just commissioning a market mix model. This was something quite groundbreaking. And I went out to the wonks experts on the email list to see who'd got any relevant experience to the challenge, just to say, okay, can anyone help here? And there was lots of interest, but no one had actually done anything like we were attempting. They were all saying, let me know if you actually find a good route to this. Also, Latam Airlines, just as many clients have done, had previously had an approach which just seemed too simplistic for the stakeholders and therefore wasn't trusted. So this time we needed to ensure that whatever we designed was embraced by the company. And our objective was to create a single framework that should be used by everyone throughout Latam Airlines who might be evaluating potential projects for investment that would then impact on customer experience. And as NPS was the metric used within the company, this was also important to use as a way of getting the customer's voice heard. We wanted our framework to be consistent, so everyone would share the same approach and we could evaluate every single customer experience initiative, not just one or two. We wanted to be able to have something that would work for every initiative. We also wanted to shorten the process to create the business cases and to minimize the need for people to have to source data over and over again for each decision. So we wanted something where we weren't reinventing the wheel. The data was all there, it just needed reconfiguring for this particular business case. And we wanted to ensure that the framework produced more accurate results that predicted the value of the decisions being taken. We knew that we needed to incorporate the different impact that the investment would have on the different customer segments, because a business customer could be very different from a leisure customer. So that was the ambition. And no, we weren't actually talking about a model. And as we went through the stakeholder interview process, we realized that what we needed was more of a decision tree approach. So we kicked our stakeholder interviews off in Q1 this year. And by September, Latam Airlines were ready to use the approach to take investment decisions. And I was fortunate enough to have Andre and one of his team members, Hayshaw, fly to New York for the ARF Experience Times Science event that was running during Ad Week. And this was where the work was first presented. So today, Andre is going to be taking you through this case study, but he's also going to be letting you know some of the profound impacts that have happened even in the last couple of months since this case study was presented. So Andre, I'm going to hand over to you now. Andre, I wonder if you're on mute.
Thanks, Fiona. I just thank you for the introduction, indeed. And then I was just telling that it was only possible because of Latam's operations diversity. Latam is the leader in flights within South America and from South America to another parts of the world. But our position into every country is very different, and even the kind of or the segment of passenger we have in flying with us. For example, Latam is the main leader in Chile, and it also operates in Brazil. That's one of the toughest domestic markets in the world. So we have different, just because it's too competitive. So we just have very different kinds of passenger and operations and travelers. Um, Latam has 7 million passengers a year. And as I was just saying, they are very different. The most frequent one has flown more than 200 trips in a year, and the least frequent has flown once, right? And we have 10 billion revenues in 2018, $10 billion revenues, and the major buyer has spent 10,000 times the lowest. We have flights from 40 minutes to 15 hours. And in 2018, it's nice to mention that we were the most punctual airline in the world. So this kind of diversity was key to develop this project, because we could compare the behavior of this major buyer, for example, and the tourist traveler that has just flown us. And one of the biggest market as Brazil, and a small market as Ecuador, one dominant market as Chile, and a competitive one as Colombia. So this diversity was crucial to develop the case I'm gonna take you through. You can move this Fiona.
Thank you. I'm just trying to move it. There we go.
Customer experience investments are really challenging for across all the airline industry. First of all, because the assets are very expensive. Not only the aircrafts, but the providers you have are just a few, and they are distributed across all over the world. And it's a regulated market. So anything you have to change or you want to change is very expensive. Things the simplest thing until the more complex one. In addition, it's a really low margin industry. Um, Actually, across the world, the average margin is not positive. And of course, you have some airlines that have great margins, but not as other industries. So it makes the customer experience investment much harder. The decision itself is much harder to take. And it's a really high volatility market, especially in Latin America, because of oil prices and politics, environmental issues. So when we add these three things, expensive assets, low margins, and high volatility industry, every approval is really tough and time consuming. And that was our main difficult. We just asked Fiona and Mesh help to work with, in order to try to solve and have something more something more objective and corrected to approach every customer experience investment decision. Move.
Yes, I'm sorry, it's taking a little while to move.
No problem, sorry.
No. I'm just seeing if there's any other way I can move it.
Then we had the plan we just designed, had three stages. First of all, we just implemented 2 years ago a competitive NPS survey. Now it's easy to understand how important it was, but actually you have 230,000 answers for 35 airlines, because as we operate 6 domestic markets and all continents, we have lots of different competitors, and the survey was key to understand the strengths and the weaknesses of each one in each route or each market we just compete. Then the second step was build a relative scale of NPS, because as a competitive NPS, we have an answer for Latam and an answer for a competitor. Then we just put it into a relative scale in order to try to identify any customer sensitivity to this KPI, this relative NPS. And after we just could identify a relation between NPS and flight behavior and churn, we built a calculator that make it possible to understand which markets or which flight segment are more sensitive to NPS and which one are not. And then we just have to take it to the whole company in order to have each one from airports, from onboard, from frequent flyer, considering this intelligence in order to monetize the return from customer investments. You can move. Thanks. So our feedback model, we just call it customer voice model. We have three stages here. The first one is the competitive NPS, as we call strategic NPS. That's this survey in which we just compare Latam and all of our competitors and the one we are gonna take through here. Then we have the operational survey, operational NPS. It's a post-flight NPS. You just arrived into your destination, and we are asking you about how it was. It's focused on execution monitoring, so airport process, crew process, and anything based on your flight experience in the short term. And then the ADOC research, that's our main focus on innovation. So when we need to just design a new product or change something into the frequent flyer or the kind of food we have inside the aircraft or the preferred departure time of corporate travelers, we just exploit this ADOC research we have. So now here we are going to talk about the competitive NPS, the competitive data that we have for Latam and for the competitors. You can move. Thanks. So to give everyone an idea how it is, the first question of the survey is, please choose 2 airlines you have flown in the last 6 months. In this example, a customer could choose Air Canada and American Airlines. If he has flown Latam, American, Air Canada, or even more, he or she have to choose only 2. Then the NPS is competitive. It's a comparison because it's in the same page. It's a really tough measurement, and it's, of course, customer can be even harder in the evaluation when we compare the strategic NPS, the operational NPS. Strategic NPS used to be lower because the complexity of this comparison moment. And then after the direct comparison, just come the root causes and touch point satisfaction questions, and some of them about some additional ones about customer profile in order to try to segment them differently according to their behavior. So after we just implement strategic NPS and we've been through 2 years of sense, we decided to compare the behavior or the frequency, the amount of trips of each customer before answering the survey and then after answering the survey. It's too obvious and it's simple if one realize, but actually it's really hard in the airline industry. It's really hard to IO economic effects, macroeconomic effects, and demand and competitive effects from what really happens. So the survey was key because we could understand the frequency from the previous months, then segregate customers from the ones who prefers Latam, so put a higher NPS for Latam, or a higher NPS for the competitor, so prefers the competitor, and then how both targets lies after the survey response, and then it's the magic of this model. When we put all the answers in this relative scale I just told you, from -10 when a customer just put 10 for our competitor and 0 for Latam, until the customer that has put 10 for Latam and 0 from the competitor, what we saw is a correlation with churn rate. So as much as a customer prefers a competitor, their churn is higher. And as much as customers prefers Latam, their churn is lower. So the NPS, the monetized NPS for us is based in a gap of churn, in a lack of churn when comparing the customers that prefers competitors and the customers that prefers Latam. But the most interesting thing wasn't that customers that prefers your company, in our case Latam, churns much lower than the ones that doesn't prefers. The next chart, we can see that we have really sensitive segments and non-sensitive segments. For example, if you just analyze the A segment, it's inelastic actually, because the churn is about the same when a customer highly prefers a competitor or highly prefers Latam. But when we just take into the analysis of the segment B, the segment B is the ones that make that curve, that trend that we saw just possible, because they are much more sensitive to NPS, to experience. So it was something we learned that of course every customer matters, and when you think about recommendation, every customer matters even more, but there are some that are much more sensitive to what you offer, the experience you have, than others. So the second step that we can see in the next chart is try to understand which segments are the really sensitive ones. So a summary of this model, it's based on churn rate, frequency from after survey compared to frequency from before answer the strategic or the competitive NPS survey. So this lack of churn, what we see in blue, the XXPP, so that's the difference. That's the main KPI of this model, right? And the way you can move it is becoming customers that prefers other lines into ones that prefers Latam. That's our challenge from what we learned here. About the sensitivity, we just saw the segment that is much more sensitive are the business travelers, people who fly for work, especially when they fly in competitive markets or competitive roads. A business traveler is five times more sensitive to NPS than a tourist. It means they churn 5 times more than a tourist when they don't prefer your airline, in our case Latam. And when we compare the market competitiveness, a customer that just flies in a highly competitive market turns 10 times more than the ones that flies in a non-competitive market. Some things are pretty obvious, but what's behind this model is that we could just rationalize the monetary potential of customer experience investments. So someone could imagine and could quote that business travelers in competitive routes are much more sensitive to experience, but we never know if it's twice or it's 5 or 10 times. And now, behind what we can share with you into our confidential information, we just understand how much money we have in it, how much money we can get from improving our customer experience for the right segment. Latam, as lots of big companies, has its decision making diluted into different teams and areas. Of course, my team as intelligence research and strategy teams support every one of them, and this model is part of that. But there are lots of things, especially small things that our team cannot prioritize. Then we have just to deliver a tool. The other teams, the teams that doesn't work with this analytical world, can work with in order to take better decisions. So the way we found working with Mesh was build this calculator. I'm just gonna share. So So this calculator is based on market conditions, so especially the competitiveness, then customer segment, especially the business travelers, and the overall weight of each attribute. Of course, attributes weights differently for each market and each customer segment. So it's a combination of hundreds of information. The example we just have here is just one in one market. Comfort is the main root cause for NPS, then miles, then price, then on-time performance. But the truth is that we have hundreds of combinations, so it would just be possible through a calculator. It's a self-service tool. When the project leader just choose the market where he or she is working on, the BU impacted, the customer segment, and the route in some case, then the touch point this person or this project is just touching. For example, we have in yellow the seat comfort and the cabin conditions. Then after choosing and putting your project into this control panel we built, the user can get the next, what we see in the next chart. That's a framework of customer experience investments approval. Then here we have the impact the user's project is going to have into our operational NPS, into our strategic NPS, and then into our future revenues based on the churn model I just shared with you. Here we have something even more interesting that what we could share in New York, because we already implemented some of the changes we'd like to after this model. On the left, we just see the target or the business traveler penetration across lots of Latam roads, right? So here it's just to give you an idea of how it works. So we choose the main corporate routes, what we call ultra corporate routes. And when we analyze these routes by schedule is basically day of week and hour of departure. We can see that some days of the week during the morning and some other days during the afternoon, we have much more penetration of those business travelers. That's the segment we want to deliver an enhanced experience. So we decided to do something different in order to try this model. Those routes and schedules were in the past. We just have they were basically domestic flights that just had food for sale, what we call buy on board in the industry, and a regular aircraft configuration. So the same space between seats for the whole aircraft. The first change we just did was offering a breakfast in the schedules in the morning and a happy hour service in the afternoon, a complimentary service, of course, with food and drinks, and it could improve our NPS into 0.6 times. And then we could zoom to this product, enhanced aircrafts with an extra space between seats and a segmented cabin, in which we have in the front part of the aircraft even more space, and then in the middle a little bit less, and then behind the aircraft even less. So we could segment the aircraft, but generally across the board having a much better aircraft or cabin experience flying those routes and schedules. And when we add to this complimentary food service the extra space, we could boost NPS into 1.5 times. Finally, there are something much bigger that's happening than this specific project that was changing the culture of the company. First thing I just realized that is that now across all customer experience and part of operational teams, we have a discussion about segmentation opportunities. Everyone is thinking about what I can do differently to deliver a great experience for all my customers, but an even greater and enhanced experience for the business travelers, our target. And our teams have been growing in size and stature as we see here. We're just I wouldn't say that the next step is about getting this model into something more evolved, but I just believe the next step is consolidating this cultural transformation, this cultural twist across all the company, what's gonna put Latam in a much better position for both segments.
Thank you so much, Andre. That was fabulous. Every time I hear that presentation, I learn more and more. So now we want to move into discussion and ask some questions. I've got some questions here that I want to ask, but before I do, Zena, are we getting anything through from the listeners?
Not yet, but just to remind everybody, if you have any questions, please use the chat box and send these to the host, and I will provide these to Catherine to moderate through.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so Fiona and Andre, I know you talked a little bit about this up front, but would love to dive deeper into what hypotheses you were working with as you started the model.
I think it's a really good question, and I touched on it early on because we knew what the objectives were, but we didn't know whether it would be a model where you put everything in and it kind of churned the answer out. You know, and actually we then realized that it needed to be more of this decision tree type approach. So you could see then, well, okay, what if I change the route? What if I change the segment? How can I do it like that? Because that would be much more transparent for people, and they'd had the example previously of, you know, if you increase NPS by 1%, you will get Y, and they didn't really want that black box. But I don't think we knew this right at the beginning. It came through from speaking to the stakeholders, hearing what they liked and what they were looking for. But it'd be great, I think, Andre, to hear your perspective too.
Yeah, I really like when you say that when someone just asks about how much works 1 point of NPS. Actually, it depends. That's the answer. That's what we figured out here. It depends on the customer. It depends on the market it customers flies, and that simple approach we use it to have in the past actually didn't work because it's much more complex. But additionally, what we could work really well with Mesh is putting something much complex, because actually it's much more complex than we can see here, into a confident and a simple way of rationalize this history that we share with the top management teams in a very similar way that we just saw here.
Great, thank you. So another question that I think might be helpful that I'd like to know, and again, I know you touched on it a little bit as you were going through, but so companies think about maybe doing something similar, creating tools that help make the right investment decisions. What challenges should they maybe keep top of mind or be thinking about that they're most likely going to face?
Fiona, you or me?
I would say that so many tools, I'm sure, get created and then they don't get used and embraced. And that's been something I've been most impressed with, actually, with LATAM in general. Even when we did the NPS calculator, I remember speaking to you, Andre, and saying, do we need to do some training and socializing and communication around this? And he said, you said, well, no, quite a few people already are using it. They're really happy with that. And I think that's been the case here. The fact that you were presenting in September and it had only gone live in August, and already investment decisions have been taken using this, I think is a real indictment to making sure that stakeholders are invested and are excited and that are taken along the route. So they really felt that they had helped create this, because they would be saying things like, well, I really need to understand the difference between this and this. And at least then when we could go back, we go, yes, okay, we've looked at this. Or even if we couldn't look at everything, we could say, well, look, we've looked at it in relation to churn, but yes, there will be other factors. And perhaps we can make things a bit more sophisticated as we go, but let's start and get something which is going to be usable that everyone understands. So for me, I think the biggest challenge is probably people and culture. And I think that you set out a great structure, Andre, in order to ensure you had senior stakeholders buying in and working throughout.
I would add the point of transparency, because this model works for the better and for the worst. So the first thing our financial team did after we just developed this was discussing with us the projects of attributes that just don't wait according to customers declaration of relevance for each touch point. So it's a way of work. It cannot be a black box. So this model was, or this tool was presented, was delivered as something with lots of transparency for what works in terms of customer experience investments and what doesn't work, because there are lots of attributes that doesn't weigh that much as others, or in a more developed, or we are in a more developed level. So we would have to invest a lot in order to achieve a better satisfaction KPI. It was a relevant part, actually. It's not a customer experience tool that works to approve customer investment. It works to deny customer experience investments too.
Oh, yes, and that's a very, very important point that's got both sides of that, absolutely. And the other thing that I like about it as well is again, as I was saying up front, the context. It incorporates all the context, business flyers different from leisure flyers, et cetera. So a next question.
Catherine?
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry, I've got a few questions that came in. Is it okay to go through a couple now?
Absolutely.
All right, so first question, is competitive data self-reported? Are you able to link to your internal customer data for Latam Airlines flyers?
Yes, it's key. Actually, there is a question about how our teams are structured that was also key for this. Most of companies used to have intelligence or customer intelligence and research teams separately. What we did exactly 2 years ago was joining both teams. So now research and intelligence are under same responsibilities. When you just work with your internal information, your transactional data, and you just add your perception information, your perception data from those kind of service, you just boost the kind of insights you can have.
Next question. Did you bring any other metrics for economics beyond churn?
Actually, yes. Part of all of it was make it simple, and the way we found to make it as simple as possible was choosing frequency and not others. But we used to compare each customer's yield That's a metric, that's the sum of all tickets bought by the customers in US dollars, divided by the kilometers customer has flown. So we have the price paid for each kilometer. It's a very common metric across the industry, but I don't know if other airlines just take this metric into customer world. So if they have this yield for each kilometer flown by each customer, and of course average fares and average income yearly are the main economic KPIs we have.
Are there any modifications you would make to the model based on what you have seen?
Actually, certainly yes. Maybe you would have more granularity, because some markets, even for example, if you think about Colombia market, within the same market, you can have lots of routes that are competitive and lots that they are not. So this analysis cannot go into Colombia, but we need to open this information according to each route or each combination of routes. So I would add a more granularity, and if customers is a multi-destination customer, or he just fly one route, and I would add just more information, I think.
And Andre, what about, we obviously looked at churn, but the other thing is by surprising and delighting customers, you could increase the frequency and the positive perspective as well.
Yeah, one part of the learned was that if we just take a look into that trend that come from -10 to +10, the changes or the biggest changes are into the extremes. So it means you cannot feel better. In the past few years, we just use it to compare ourselves with competitors, and trying to be a little bit better, or being 5 or 10 points of NPS better than the others. Now we see here is that you need much more difference. If not, the customer just don't realize. And so we are focusing, first of all, being competitive across all markets, but choose specific markets or specific routes, as the one I just shared the product we have right now, in which we have a much more competitive product than the others.
And this is the last question I have in. Has growth predicted from model been validated after in-market changes, specifically NPS?
Yes. We just started measuring the churn rates across all markets. What's not common for airline industry, actually. Churn is not a common metric across airlines. So we start this measurement, and on those specific markets, we change our product in a true disruptive way. We've seen great results, actually.
No more questions from on my end.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I've got one more that I'd like to throw out, and then perhaps we can wrap up. So I know we talked about the challenges. You talked about some things that you might add to the tool, but last question would be, any lessons learned? Anything you would do? If you could do it over again, anything you would do differently that companies should know about?
I would try to have we just got a similar question, but now I had more time to think. I would struggle a little bit more to have bigger samples, because as my first answer was that I would have more granularity, but as granular as we are, the few sample we have. So I would try to have even much more answers than we have, in order to go to deep dive into other features of customers and markets.
I think the thing that I was quite interested in was when we went out researching before we actually started the project. And Andre, I know that you went to a really big exhibition or a conference in Singapore with other airlines to find out what they were doing as best practice. And I went out to WONCS and obviously the ARF, and I was going to other bodies to see, you know, what is best practice. And I think it was useful for us to know that we hadn't found anyone else doing something similar. And therefore, this was going to be groundbreaking. It was going to be difficult, but it was going to be exciting. And we were all united as a team to see how could we approach this. But I think doing that initial piece of work was really useful for us to know, well, actually, it's not just that we're stupid and we haven't heard about something. We really couldn't find anything when we went out. And I think some of that information as well, when we were talking to stakeholders, we were trying to be very clear about what our objectives were. And that first slide that we put up on the objectives, we showed that with all the stakeholders to make sure that they bought in. So for me, I think some of the ways that we framed the piece of work were helpful. And I was genuinely impressed at the speed with which this was delivered, because this time last year, we hadn't started. And this time this year, you're taking decisions and seeing benefits to the company already.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Fiona. This was fabulous, and I'm definitely in that crowd before I saw this of, gee, I need something like this, but I have no idea where to start. So this is just a fabulous tool. So Fiona, I'm going to turn it over to you because I believe you are going to set up for the next one in the series.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Catherine. And also thank you to you, Andre, for joining us today from Latin America. Please, everybody, do save the date for the third in the series, which is all around building a CX program roadmap. It's on January the 15th in the new year. And we are lucky enough to have Hazel Pitchers, who is the Global Head of Marketing at AXA Investment Managers. And Catherine herself will also be contributing, and next time I'll be chairing. So I'd just like to thank all of you for tuning in, for asking questions, and for joining us in this webinar today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.